Hello. Today, I really want to share with you my passion for Mozart's two viola quintets. It's not just a genre, but it is string quintet. While it's combining a societal harmony, disruption, discussion, combination of 5 melodic lines, combining chordal harmonization while exponentially expanding their own personal voice leading, each and together, by subgroups or in dialogue between those individual instruments and the subgroups that they form. It is particularly meaningful to me to convey to you the importance that it will take in your own lives if you listen, and I highly suggest that you do, to these quintets of Mozart. They are a spiritual food. I always remember the day I discovered them, like the day when I discovered them was a fulfillment, a plenitude, a meaning, a way of elegance and strive and resolve and intensity, and mostly a sense of humanity, as if they speak like an opera, like a sonata, like a symphony, like the Requiem, or like another of his mass. I mean, words obviously don't suffice me. And I'm not intending to have the pretension to describe them, explain them. No, I just wanted to make sure that through this today, you might, if you didn't know them, discover them. And hopefully they will become as integral part of your inner musical pantheon. Not only for the fact that it's by Mozart and it's a string chamber music group, but because I think it has a universal message that is so enticing that I find myself often hearing it in my head no matter what I'm doing, driving, cleaning, cooking, going to school, even in between lessons or even during lessons, because the gestures of the intervals, the emotional aspect of the drive that comes out of their intensity as well as of their pure expression of human psyche at its different levels of experience, of uplifting and of down-to-earth drive. It is, to me, possibly the works which define best the nucleus of Mozart's expression. First of all, he played the second viola with the quartet. Therefore, he insisted to bring in the inner voices with these two violas. Schubert did a two-cello quintet, also an incredible masterpiece of human expression. That can be said, of course, for any genre, but I still think that within the confines of four for quartets, five for quintets, obviously, individual voices coalescing while free-flying, it's the beauty of the inner voices. Nothing is hidden under the carpet. This kind of feeling that the music comes from the inside out. You have a melody, you have a bass line, and you have these inner voices, which are not just harmonizations. They are intertwined voicings, which bring with imitations, with eloquence of gestures of ascending six, of melodic lines that are imitating arias. And, well, ultimately, every music imitates the voice. The gesture of the interval is the expression of that emotion, or that strive, or that drive, of that. All these elements are embedded in the gesture of the interval as a really deeply, I think it is an allegory of life. I give you an example. The G minor one is, well, that's the opening. That's a bit of best parts of the first theme through the piece, sort of a best of. Now the second theme, with a gestural invention that he brings us through this ascending interval of the sixth. Isn't it so moving? So, in fact, this second theme has every expression of the leap of the sixth, appoggiatura to the perfect fifth, the leap of the ninth, the minor ninth that is so intensely painful to the octave. This leap of the dissonance, this leap of the expression that reaches to the appoggiatura just above the and that rhythmicity, the pulse that is constantly going on in the piece in terms of the chords. But are they chords? They're combinations of instruments playing a chordal group. And therefore the first violin is the aria singer. And then it comes in the cello, in the viola. So he uses the circle of fifths for development, this sequence, which by itself could be banal, but in the situation, the modulations, the darkness of the choice of G minor, of course for strings it makes sense because of the open strings, but even so, the idea of having a first theme that rises so fast and then drops by chromatic tiers of semi-steps. I get so emotional when I talk about this piece that I don't manage to keep my thought process very continuous. I'm sorry for that. The piece is too driven, too emotional, too special. Ré, si, la, sol, ré, mi, ré, do, si, la, sol. And I find that when you hear this piece, you don't stay passive listener. You become active. It's almost the pacing of these repeated chords. And the chromaticisms. And when he does that same second theme for the coda. So this one I recommend very highly. If you don't know it, please discover it. And if you already heard it, please re-listen to it. It has so much to give through life. It reveals itself not entirely right away. You discover different flavors within that same recipe. You discover different expressions of subtlety, especially with the inner voices. And this dramatic G minor that is the choice of the tonality, but also because of the repeated eighth notes, a sense of necessity for the essential right away. There's no time to spare. It's not really anxiety because it's not that syncopated, though it could be considered so, but it's more about the inevitability of the intensity of living. This is where we are. We vibrate with the earth, the sky, the things. We don't know for how long, but we are here, and we are deeply involved in our sensitivity, our sensibility. We are alive, literally, when we hear. And when he uses it in such a final way in the coda, in the sense that his acceptance with the diminished, augmented sixth rather, so-called German, it contrasts with the first time we hear it. And the recapitulation in the tonalization of G minor. And when you hear it in the relative major, you hear it with the major ninth. When you hear it in the tonalization, in minor. I think that this subtle colorization of the major minor for the same theme is very meaningful. Hope, acceptance. Already Chopin, in his similarly G minor first ballade, has the hope to go to the relative major, and then the return to the acceptance of the half diminished. And in the fourth ballade, the theme ends melodically with this minor ninth. So to say, naked minor ninth with the bass line, and then harmonized. It's exactly what Mozart does there in the second theme. And you can say, so what? They all do minor nines, they all do circle of fifths, they all do appoggiaturas, they all do relative majors, they all use the language of the tonal system to express the different elements of human psyche. That's true. Hope, despair, major, minor, relative, diminished, augmented, tension, release, all these are part of the grammar of music. They're part of the expression through the grammar of music, of human expression through the sounds of music as a language that translates the meanings. And yes, it could be banal, and yes, it could be factual, and it is. And what does it do that all of a sudden something banal or factual or shared, because it's not atonal, it's not rethought, it's not rethinking the very alphabet of music when Mozart writes it. It's just that, in my opinion, he summarizes so intensely, so down to the heart, without any unfiltered emotional connection directly to that. Possibly Chopin, I don't know how much he knew of the two viola quintets, because today we know more music of the past available to us than they had in their past. But perhaps he did, and if he didn't, it was in the musical intuition of this shared grammar of music to express lament, to express expression of uncertainty or of anxiety or of expectation. It's possible, but it's probably just a shared fact. And it could be that it doesn't mean that they have to know in order to copy or to inspire themselves in their own way from what they've heard. And it's difficult to know. I mean, scholars know better what the musicians of the past knew themselves of their own past. But generally speaking, they lived shorter and they didn't have that much time to study or that much opportunity to have a data of sound and scores available so that they can sort of sponge it. And probably they sponged some other less. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, they had something to give us. And I thank Mozart every day for giving us elegance and drive and emotion and humanity and humor. And yes, you can say it's already in Haydn's expression, a little bit of humor, a little bit of drama, a lot of form, a lot of elegance and expression of the organization of the voices in a very consensual way, so that you can have the string quartets, which are his major symphonies as well, of course, oratorios, achievements. But we all can trace what were the things which inspire the composer from where they come. Schubert, Beethoven, certainly Chopin, Mozart, well, Schumann, also Schubert. Well, obviously, most composers were inspired by Beethoven, Brahms, Liszt, I mean. And then it doesn't matter ultimately, because in a way, you catch on something and then you blossom it into something else that comes partly from you, partly from what you received. And it doesn't have to be defined so much than that. It could, but I don't see the final point. I think it's the experience of humanity. You receive a mother tongue by the ear, you grow up in a given culture, and by idealization or by imposed ideology, you end up by believing in it, loving it, and then of course historically understanding the situation in which you're born, in the time period which enemies are hereditary to the country where you are, but they're not part of your birth. You don't know anything about it. You acquire all these cultural signs, systems of reaction, then characteristic of personalities, but you're an individual nonetheless. You don't belong only to the herd, though you are part of genetic material, you're part of a cultural material, you're part of a group from which you come and then you identify with by conviction or by some kind of a desire to belong. And I don't know how much we define the composers belonging to the Baroque, to the Classic, to the Romantic, to the neo-this, to the neo-that. I don't think they identified themselves as we identify them, because I think they were more strictly in their present, which was scarce and immediate, and not so much time to dwell over the past or imagine the future. They were in the present, and I think in a way their spontaneity, their quickness to learn the trade towards organizing their thoughts in writing, in sculpting, in painting, in composing. It doesn't have to be specific in philosophizing, in organizing political ideas about societal inequalities. And all these things are part of the human nature. They bother them, or they drive them, or they revolt them against situations that they find unjust, poverty, and all these kind of things are permanent on human nature's awareness. And of course, everybody deals with it differently. And that's the way it is, and it should be. I totally understand that. But I feel like a work of art is not just beauty or aesthetic presentation or self-representation physically through a painting or a sculpture, or even a non-representation of anything other than an inner world of paintings that have no representation of specific things, so that you enter in the inner world anyway of a given artist when you watch, read, play their game, if they invented it, a film that they wrote, a storytelling basically. Music is storytelling, but is beyond that. I'm totally convinced it is a mark left of their passage on earth about the things that meant to them. Is it the spiritual elevation that they need to find solace, hope, generosity, or down to earth help through grounding agricultural situations, industrial things, developing the human experience. Unfortunately, the wars and the racisms and the rejections between genders and people is just so full of hatred that possibly music was a refuge for a composer like Mozart to express the inner world of hope, purity. Perhaps it's a very banal word, but some kind of a strive towards something that he doesn't see around him. This kind of idealized beauty, even if as a person we can trace that he was this or that character personality, but it's not the person who we listen when we hear the quintet, is the inner person, the inner world, the soul that was trying to express something beyond the body, through the body. And somehow it happens to be meaningful to us way away from all these contexts, from cultural context or time period. It has some universal meaning, this intervals gesture. It's not just an interval, but it is what it is by itself. We can put into it all our emotional, as I do, expression of emotion, of hope, or of pain, or of drive. But ultimately, it is standing there in a way very open to us to take it and use it for our own solace or drive in life. It doesn't give us the recipe and say this is only for that. It's a way to say take it and bring it forward, which is what I'm doing here with the fact that you will react, or perhaps if you love the pieces in question, you might find things in them that are not what I say, let less what I cannot even say all the things that they mean to me because they seem infinite, but let less it is for you yourself individually to see what it means. You could also say it's boring, I don't like it, it doesn't mean to me. Perhaps you're not in the disposition to receive it because you have to grow up into different awarenesses of a given genre, style, time period, historically, when you study, when you visit a museum, or when you hear a conference, or you see a film on period time, and all of a sudden you're immersed in an atmosphere that somehow connects to you emotionally, even sensually, just pleasurely. You want to be there. Yeah, it's an idealized escapism, isn't it? And so it might then bring you to it through another path. I find myself to have discovered the main things in my life so far, not from where they were supposed to come in terms of studying, reading. Well, I received a lot of knowledge from the studying, but the essential things I discovered on the side of the road. By curiosity, by the desire to understand or to re-understand if I didn't get it, perhaps also by the desire to know better what just touched me emotionally, but I want to know. So perhaps knowing doesn't help to understand better why you love it, you just love it. And then the curiosity is probably the human nature to understand, what is behind this planet, what is under this atom, inside it. That's human nature probably. But it's not a curiosity for the sake of it. I think it's more because you see a gaze, you feel an atmosphere that comes from a presence of a human being. Could it be a smile? Could it be something miscellaneous to what they say? Perhaps the way they laugh or the way they blink. And you don't have to always analyze it. It happens probably at subconscious levels. And all of a sudden you're charmed or you're moved and you feel like, I want to know better this person. And I think the same thing happens with music. You discover it and then you want to know it better. The D major, 2 violas opening quintet. His introduction is just like discovering an incredible place, country, space. You don't know exactly where it leads you, but you follow it. The interruptions of the silences, the individual voice like the cello, the answer that is supposed to give you some answer, but in fact it leads through the strings on the top part to more questions. And then you have the, of course, deceptive cadence, the chromatic size of the melodic dropping on the Neapolitan six, darkening before the dominant, which is major triad, but with the minor six. Yes, all these ingredients exist. I think of them while I play them. Thankfully, I don't want to be saying them loud voice while I play, because I feel, as I just did when I displayed it for you, that it talks so much more meaningfully than I will ever. And the only thing that I was hoping when I was playing is that I could convey to you the intensity of the pregnant rests. Second violin going up the octave, mi, mi, re, do. While the first violin does mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, 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 mi. And the first viola, do, re, la. Even in the inner voice, this hidden gem of the leap of the octave, which is a huge interval compared to the step motion of the viola and the first violin, while the second viola is on the A. Of course, on the piano you have to bring them out by shadow and lights. But if you bring it too much, you distract from the melody. And that's probably what the chamber music of strings together in this case can do best, is that while you hear the combination, you still hear the individual voices without one prevailing over the other. They are complementary, and they have their own leaps and expression of top and drop, and the melody of the violin for one to the G. And then you hear the scaled harmonic notes. So now that I exposed them to you by layers, and I play them just as they are together on the piano, they sound like chords, which they combined produce. So how do you hear the voices as layers, and then their subtle combination in harmonic progression on the piano? I don't know that there is a way other than choosing very subjectively. I was going to try to objectivize, but it's impossible. Which one you want to bring? Of course, naturally you want to think the melody. Then the secondary voice of the leap of the second violin. Regardless if it's viola, second violin, whichever in their voices. And when the cello, after the next pregnant rest, which so, instead of giving the solace answer, it ends up again on the question, where, what? Second degree, E minor. 5 of 6, 2, and 7, 1 on 1. You think this time he answered the question of the opening. Shall we go somewhere? Oh yes, we'd like to explore these beauties. Or what about this in E minor through the B minor chord, and then 2-5 back to D major? So you would think that's over. We've done the tonic and the dominant and then the tonic. This dramatic entrance in minor of the cello is just so well, perhaps I feel I'm overstating it when I say it. Devil's advocate that I am to myself. Perhaps the audacity of us escapes today to go from major to minor. And it's only major to minor, but it is major to minor. And because of that pregnant rest, which is a musicological term, by the way, I don't think it's so much the major and the minor third, is so much the break between the two. You could have gone on the subdominant. Or in minor. Or through a sequence, but minor. And then the lament of the dropping melodic semitones and the half diminished, on which he interrupts again the rest. It's all about interrupted silences opening. And then the flat six deceptive cadence delay tactics, then the Neapolitan, and then the dominant harmonic pedal. But in D major should have been secondary dominant, but with a flat six. So it's half major, half minor. He doesn't do that. That's my inner peregrinations. Because once you're immersed in Mozartism, in this case, of his quintet in D major for two violas, it's easy to, at least for me, but I do it in a liberating way, probably, to sort of prolong the moment. Thankfully, Mozart knew, on top of all the emotional expression, the rest, the altered degrees, the different effects, to be concise. So he doesn't overstay anything, nor understay. That sense of elegance that he has in the expression of things, that doesn't stay redundantly there. It's such lesson of elegant majesty, of choice, of concision, of combining the elements between the rests that are as intense as the music, the questions that are answered by other questions, the element of reflection that comes to you when you hear this introduction, regardless what you're doing or how you would perceive it, or how much of it you perceive, aware or not about the harmonic chordal denominations or not, it's secondary. Of course, it's important for a musician to name them, just like for a scientist to name the elements that they work with in order to produce, organize, imagine, and develop. But okay, that is what you learn. But the effects that they produce musically, that they suggest, that they hint, that they embed inside the major dominant chord, the minor, and then at the very end of the introduction, the dominant seventh, which is normally on the top of the triad, here he plays under in the third inversion, a 4/3 chord in the cello. He could have done, but he does it in the bass. in the disposition, 2 A's, 1 C sharp leading tone, but 2 dominants and 1 leading tone, and then a single subdominant, dominant 7th in the bass, and the appoggiatura or the neighboring tones. See, I lose my intellectual brain thought of naming the things so much. The sound of it, it's sensual, it's sensorial in that sense. More than what it is analytically, it's what it brings to you in the depth to have this dominant 7th instead of on top, but as a major 9th under inverted. Because he stayed so long on the dominant root. So when you hear it, watch for it. It's there. More subtle than in the way I played, because in a way the string instruments share the same family of sound instruments, but the vibrato, the difference of sliding, the intonation, the way they organize the fingering, the choice. There are so many subtle ways to suggest in intervals leap, even a minor second compared to a, let's say, major 9th or something. There's something unique about string quintets or quartets, of course quartets mainly, but those quintets are gems, rare gems. I recall many moons ago, I was touring with a string quartet, and they were playing the Mozart D minor K421. And in the development, discovered this quartet one evening of a summer Fontainebleau session. Mademoiselle Boulanger has brought us after dinner to discover this, and she asked me to read it on the piano while the other students were looking at the score. And it was the twilight of the day, and I remember discovering these incredible modulations in the D minor quartet in question, but in the development going through flat keys that are unnameable. And so there was a section with these induced dissonances by imitation. So when I was on the tour with the quartet, I asked them, please allow me to kneel down in the middle of U4, not as an audience on the side while they were rehearsing. And I literally was immersed in the quartet between the 4 instruments. Oh my God, that was such a sensorial feeling. Not only do you hear every detail, but the combination all at the same time. It's full immersion. It's more than 3D, more than, it's probably some kind of full musical or ear or hearing experience, because you're in the heart of the atom of the music making. And I think that when you hear a quartet, even on a good recording, you hear a good combination of the resonances, the sounds, the vibrato, the slides between notes, all these specifics to the stylistic playing of the players, and then the combination with the acoustics and the microphones. Obviously, it has to be extracted as what it is, a quartet in this case. But when you're immersed inside it, you hear it with levels of elements that strike you, charm you, surprise you. You feel like in an enchanted world within. Oh, that was differently striking as the day I discovered it, sight reading it on the piano around Mademoiselle Boulanger in that late evening. You know, it's like people who matter in your life, you remember always the day you met them. Circumstantial situation, perhaps in your life or theirs, or you're in the middle of something altogether, or in a crowd, or in a, I don't know, whichever, doesn't matter. But it remains something that even if you become friends for decades later, you still remember the day you met them. And they age and you still see them the way you discovered them. If they were children and they are adults, you remember them because you've seen their path. In every gaze of them, you see what you don't know when you meet somebody directly at a given time, and then you start from there onwards. And I find that music is like this. It exists before you. You manage to, perhaps by chance or teaching or studying or curiosity brought to it, you discover it, and all of a sudden it becomes an unbelievably important thing in your life. You cannot without it. How did I live without this symphony, this sonata, this opera? It's part of my inner life, or this painting, or this sculpture, or this style of the Impressionism compared to the Dutch painters of the, I mean, one or the other, regardless which, a film, filmmaker, an atmosphere, a serial, a storytelling, a book, an amazing story that brings you to imagine, travel in your inner world and imagine it better and more than a specific film can adapt it, because it is part of your inner world. It's a human nature to share storytelling, mythological or real or existential or imaginary, daydreamed or combined with the reality. This is what we are. We like to dream. We wake up, we forget our dreams during the daytime. We organize, we are driven, and then we start dreaming about something because somehow our senses or our awareness, and perhaps not fully because we have so many awarenesses, how to connect to things that are around us. Perhaps we miss many, perhaps we connect to some, but in this case, once you discover the quartet K421, it's difficult to not remember it, just like a significant person you met in your life. And that, I think, is part of the richness to carry inside you, the beauties that these musicians left for you. And it possibly happens also that you pass next to it and you don't notice it, or it doesn't mean to you, or it doesn't appeal, or you just feel like, no, I don't like it. Now, what does that mean? I don't understand it? Perhaps. I don't want to be around it? Possibly. Perhaps later, that's a little bit nice to say, but not really the spontaneous thing we tell ourselves. We tend to do for tastes in food, for tastes in art, for tastes in people, for tastes in everything, to go by our intuition, our drive, our irrepressible necessity that we try to suppress because of societal situation, and we learn how to behave. Therefore, we can find attraction, but we can also find the way to not succumb to every attraction. And that's how people grow up. Maturity is choices and organization and discipline in order to perhaps at some point, inevitably by that discipline of life, then you can perhaps receive something that you wouldn't if not. A Scriabin sonata is differently intense than a Mozart quintet or a Bach mass, but it's like everything in life. Do you prefer sunset or a pear? I mean, come on. Obviously, it's part of life. You could eat a pear and watch a sunset, or not combine them at all. And same thing with this. You can say, oh, this means to me that. And when I see this film, I remember something about my own life because, or the theater play describes my own shortcomings comically. So I laugh about it because if not, it'd be tragic. But in a way, comedy is a way to laugh on our own shortcomings, and drama is to plunge ourselves in emotions that we feel more or less clearly, sometimes painfully too, and we identify. Yes, of course, there is a sense of identification. Any psychologist will say that, and any philosopher will explain that we need to somehow appropriate the elements that we deal with to become ours in order to express what it means to us, either to pass it, either to reinvent it, either to question it, either to reject it, scientifically or artistically or emotionally or humanly, and say, I hate the way the government works, I want there to be a society that's more this, more that. Of course, it's idealizations, but through art you can idealize a lot, and you can escape a lot. And at the same time, it brings you a level of inner world reflection that the immediacy of everyday life doesn't allow you. We in the everyday life, we're obliged to always react to things by reaction, to just go through the elements of the puzzles of life, from daily life to existential life. How, what, how much, from when, since what, where, what. But okay, once you put aside all these existential questions, even in the daily life, we deal with these things, and all of a sudden we have a work of art, whichever form it takes. It questions us innerly, and we enter in a reflection. And so that's why when I discovered this development of the 4-to-1 sight reading it, and then I was immersed many years later in the quartet playing it, I reconnected to that day I discovered it. And I felt like, wow, so good to be in it, within it. Not only on the surface from outside where you hear it, you watch it, you play it, you organize it, you finger it, you phrase it, you pedal it on the piano, you secure the texture, you secure the technique to make sure that it's reliable on any instrument, or more or less. And then the industry of playing overtakes the emotion of discovery, which happened at the get-go when you discovered the piece. But because you repeat brainlessly, hopefully with concentration rather than brainlessly, repetitive practicing in order to secure that cognitive muscular memory awareness that allows you then to be more reliable than less when you perform it, you're overtaken by the industry of making it rather than only plunged in the emotional or reflective abysses that it brings you to plunge in when you're just the listener. But again, it's not a passive listening to listen to a Mozart quintet with 2 violas. It's very involving. It's very enticing. It's as if the musicians play and say, I take your hand, so to say, and come with me, come with us. Look at this, feel that, dream this, dance that, or puzzle by this, reflect by that. It's an unfiltered connection between thought through notation and touching people's, touching people. Probably that's the word. I hope you'll be touched too by the Mozart 2 viola quintets.